Great. Okay, so hello. My name is Cynthia Gillum. I'm a geographic specialist with the U.S. Census Bureau, and we're here today to talk about 2020 census and the local update of census addresses operation, which is an operation that is part of the preparation of the decennial census. So thank you for attending today's training. And as Leslie mentioned, please do ask questions along the way. And if they pertain to everyone in the general discussion, Leslie will interrupt me. I've asked her to do that just so that we can answer the question and so that I'm being clear, we all know what we're talking about. Okay. So right now, I'm in New York, live from New York, in the regional office. Vermont and the other 6 New England states, plus New York and New Jersey, as well as Puerto Rico, are in the region that's covered by the New York regional office. So we also have staff in Vermont and Massachusetts and all over the region on a 365 days a year, doing things like the American Community Survey and the Current Expenditure Survey that is in support of our operations that are ongoing. Today we're talking about the 2020 census and LUCA 2020, which happens once every 10 years. So again, today we're going to be talking about the census and how LUCA is a part of that. We're going to touch on some Census Bureau terminology, words that we use, and those definitions that will be important to know as part of the LUCA operation. I'm going to talk a lot about the different products that are associated with LUCA, one of them being the Geographic Update Partnership Software, or GUPS. We're going to move that 10-minute break all the way to the end so that we can get out of the webinar about 10 minutes early. A 2-hour webinar is a long webinar, so thank you for sticking with me. And we will try to get out of here 10 minutes early at least. And finally, we're going to be talking about what you can do now in preparation for LUCA 2020. And please feel free to ask questions throughout, and we'll also have some time for questions at the end. Okay, so why is this important? Why are we here today on this webinar? The census is really about 3 things: political power, informed planning, and money, the economic impact. The census every 10 years is authorized by Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution, and it's used to apportion representation in Congress. So we count everyone in the United States where they are so that we know how many representatives each state is allotted. In Massachusetts, for example, in the 2010 census, they did lose a seat. So they went from 8 seats to 7. And I believe actually that Vermont has 1 seat. So in the scope of Vermont, it's also interesting to think about it as a representation at the state level and how representation within your state will be allocated. The census is also used for informed planning. Governments use the census data all the time in their regional development. Businesses and nonprofits use census statistics when they make decisions, like Amazon's decision where to locate. But on a more local level, just planning for, fire departments and police and where people are living, this information is free and available to public to use every day. And then finally, we have this economic impact where over $400 billion every year is distributed using census numbers based in federal funds, and that doesn't even include grant money, which is distributed. So on an annual basis, the amount of money that's coming into your local community can really be impacted by these numbers. So the census is designed and essentially for parts. And that doesn't change over time. Whenever we do a census, we establish where to count, we motivate people to respond, we count the population, and then we release the census results. Some interesting things that we're doing different in 2020 is that when we're establishing where to count, we're using in-office address canvassing as opposed to sending people out into the field to look at every residential address in the United States. We've done one pass of the entire United States using satellite imagery and taking a look at where housing units are and tagging those new houses and new residential addresses where we can identify them in the office using mapping software. That saves a lot of time and resources rather than having to send people out into the field to walk every street in the United States. So next, we're going to motivate people to respond. There is going to be a very large ad campaign, and everyone that's actually on this webinar is going to be a partner in Census, in that you're going to know a lot more about 2020 Census than the general public. So just motivating people to respond. If everyone in the United States just mailed in their census questionnaire, it would be a lot easier to do the census. Not everybody does that. So we have a lot of different methods to get the numbers in, which brings us to counting the population. This is the first year that you're going to be able to respond to census using your smartphone or online. We're going to have a postcard that has a unique identifier so that when you receive your postcard in the mail, you can just put that unique identifier in online and fill out your census questionnaire online. If a respondent doesn't fill out that information online, we will next send them a paper questionnaire. If they do not fill out the paper questionnaire, we will send someone out to do non-response follow-up in person to get those census questions answered. And then finally, we release the results on December 31st, 2020. We have to deliver the apportionment counts to the President of the United States. That date cannot change. And then on April 1st, 2021, we need to get the data in tabular form, protecting confidentiality, to use by the public. Okay, so how does LUCA fit into all of this? We're here today to talk about LUCA specifically. So starting in 2010, we had a full and complete address list. We mailed questionnaires to every residential address in the United States, and our residential address list was very good and complete. Since then, what have we been doing to keep it up to date? We've done a lot. Every 6 months, we receive a delivery sequence file from the U.S. Postal Service with any new addresses and changes to addresses that they identify. We also get updates from tribes and states and local governments and incorporate those changes in when we can. We are working in a constrained budget environment right now. So as those projects are funded, we take updates into account. And as I mentioned, we do the in-office address canvassing. And where in-office address canvassing won't work, we will send people into the field to do in-field address canvassing as well. Also, our field data, like our field workers who work on the American Community Survey, when they're out in the field and they notice address changes, they'll note those down and we'll incorporate those as well. And finally, to keep our address list up to date, we have the LUCA operation, the local update of census addresses. And this is the only opportunity that local governments have to take a look at the census address list to see where we're missing things, where we've gotten something wrong, or if we've done a good job. And this only happens once every 10 years. So we're not going to come back next year and say, oh, it's time for LUCA again. The local update of census addresses happens once every decennial census. Okay, so LUCA, some of the background for LUCA is that since the address list for the census is confidential, it took an act of Congress to make these data available to local governments. And the reason that Congress thought that it was important that this was done is that they saw that there was a need for local governments to have access to the census address list to make changes for their local area, to make sure that the census address list was complete in their area. So who can participate in LUCA? Townships. In the Vermont area, most of the governments are organized at the town level or the village level. Any active functioning government can participate in LUCA. In much of the rest of the United States, county level government is participating in LUCA. That's how government is organized outside of the New England area for the most part. But in the New England area, this is really being done. Most government activities are organized at the town level. Vermont, as a state, will be participating in LUCA, and Leslie might be able to talk more about this later, which is that the VCGI will be partnering with an E911 board to participate at the state level, which begs the question, if LUCA is being done at the state level, why should my town participate? The towns, we're not trying to duplicate work for anyone. So the towns really do have excellent local knowledge of what's happening in their area, and may be able to add addresses that might be missed or counted only once at the state level. And we'll talk more about this as we get into the details of the presentation. Okay, so here's the schedule of the LUCA operation. Back in January, an advance notice went out. We've been sending out lots of emails. We've been doing lots of phone calls to talk about the importance of LUCA. And finally here in October, we started doing these LUCA training workshops. Pardon me. In October, so this LUCA webinar is part of the LUCA training workshops. And also in July, the invitation and registration materials were mailed out to the highest elected officials. So if your town didn't receive one, it is possible that the highest elected official was a select board chairman, and actually that information did need to get to a manager or a town clerk. So I would recommend that you inquire about the invitation, the LUCA invitation, to see who in your government it did go to. So now we're at a LUCA training workshop, and the deadline to register for LUCA is December 15th. December 15th is also the day that the new Star Wars movie comes out, so it's easy to remember. I'm really looking forward to that. So December 15th is the registration deadline, and you'll need to fill out your product preference forms and have signatures completed by that day. Next, upcoming, we're going to be doing some workshops about how to participate in LUCA this January and February that are more technical and involved in the actual review process. We're not going to do that now because if we were talking about how to participate in LUCA now, and we're actually not sending out those materials until February, I don't know about you, but I would forget a lot of those specific details. So we'll hold off on doing that until the beginning of next year. Then the work really becomes the Census Bureau's job. We have to process, we have to validate, and then we need to deliver each town feedback about every address that they've updated. And then finally, April 1st, 2020 is Census Day. So as I mentioned, the census address list is Title 13 protected by the U.S. Code. The addresses that we have are very broad in definition. It's anywhere someone may live, could live, or lives. So these data are confidential. It is a felony punishable by $250,000 and or 5 years imprisonment. So to participate, everyone that takes a look at the census address list will need to sign a confidentiality and security guideline. Oh, sorry, they'll have to read the confidentiality and security guidelines, and they'll need to sign the confidentiality agreement form. So some Census Bureau terminology that we're going to go over next is a housing unit, a group quarters, city style addresses, and non-city style addresses. And the way Census uses these terms may be a little different than you would think they're used, and they'll be useful. These terms will be useful to you while doing the LUCA operation. So a housing unit is a single-family house, townhouse, mobile home, trailer, apartment, group of homes, or single room occupied as a separate living quarter, or if vacant, intended for occupancy as a separate living quarter. So that's a really long definition, and it covers a lot. Maybe it's even a little bit confusing, but essentially what a housing unit is, according to Census, is anywhere someone lives or could live, and that's a very broad definition. So some examples of acceptable housing units for LUCA are houses and townhouses, living quarters in an otherwise non-residential structure, like a commercial property, but has an apartment in it, like a business, like a mom and pop where they live upstairs, or a school or a church. Also mobile homes, where people actually live in that mobile home on a permanent basis, is a housing unit. And we also count anything that is under construction that will be habitable, which is close to the elements with final roof, windows, and doors by Census Day, April 1st, 2020. Okay. Do we have any questions at all about that, on that?
Cynthia, this is Leslie. I actually want to highlight something because I feel like you talked about it a little bit in the workshop we did a week or two ago. And because I recently met someone who is living this way, where they live in an RV by choice, and in an RV park that actually has a number of other people living there full time as their permanent residents. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that that is included here, that obviously a town working on the address list would have to make the judgment about whether that was a location where the people living there considered it their permanent home or whether it was just a vacation thing that they were passing through, but that it can count as a housing unit if it's their permanent residence.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point. And if the RV park is one of those parks that clears out, every week, then that's not a place that we want to declare a housing unit and send them a census questionnaire. But if it's one of those RV parks where, people live there and, they're there all of the time, we want to send them a census questionnaire to that mobile home. So thanks.
And we do have a question. Herb asks, what about a homeless site as a definition of a housing unit?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So thank you for bringing that up. That's actually out of the scope of LUCA, but Census does have a separate operation to deal with homeless. So closer to, actually during the census, closer to April 1st, 2020, we're going to be working with soup kitchens and homeless shelters and all over the United States organizations that work with the homeless population to find out where their local homeless populations tend to congregate. And then one night out of the year, we want to count everyone once and only once where they are located, that and they'll tend to be less transient at nighttime. So we'll send census workers out in pairs to those locations where the homeless tend to congregate, and we will count physically that population. If anyone is awake and it's reasonable, we'll ask questions to perhaps get information on race and age and that type of thing, if it's reasonable or doable. But that's a different operation outside the scope of LUCA.
So one question I have about that is if so as you know, we have a lot of small towns where there's not necessarily an organization in town that is designated as dealing with the homeless. But if a town official who's participating in LUCA knows about like an encampment or an area where homeless people do camp sometimes, usually folks are moving into the cities for the winter months, but if they do know about people who are sort of camped out somewhere who wouldn't get counted otherwise, is there a way for them to put in that information about, here's a site that's not an address, but it is potentially a location of homeless people?
The short answer to that is I would need to get more details and look into who exactly to contact. So I can do that. I'm making a note to myself.
I suppose at the very least, the town could, if they wanted to, they could take the initiative to just let any organizations that serve the homeless know about that, because that way that organization could pass along the information.
Right, and also there will be a contact list for in Census 2010 who we worked with on this. So that would be the first line that we go to, for 2020. Those contacts change over time. So in much the same way we go out and get information out about LUCA, we'll be going out to get the word out about this homeless operation. Right. But I will check about the exact contact for that operation so that I have that phone number and email address for who's in charge of that census.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep, I can do that. Okay, so group quarters are different. Group quarters are different from a housing unit. It's a place where people live or stay in a group living arrangement that's owned or managed by an entity or organization providing housing and or services to the residents. So that would be something like a nursing home. With our aging population in the United States, more of our population are in nursing homes and assisted care facilities, and that's deemed a group quarter where a number of census questionnaires will all be sent to the same place. Correctional facilities such as prisons are group quarters, and any halfway houses or houses where people with special needs reside together, or juvenile facilities where whether it be a foster care facility or a correctional facility for juveniles, those are all group quarters. And hospitals, especially inpatient hospitals where people may be living until they are able to live on their own or permanently live, is a group quarters. Colleges and university dormitories are group quarters, and we have a number of those in Vermont, which would be important to count. And these populations count towards the population for the state and the local area, even though parents sometimes tend to think that my student is, the bill's getting footed by me and I have a room left for them in the house. We want to capture the college students where they usually reside. And if they're spending the majority of their time usually living in a dormitory, then we would want to capture them at the college. And religious group quarters. Something that came up in the workshop as a group quarter specific to Vermont would be, it was kind of like a barracks where a number of ski staff lived all together, where a service was being provided to them and housing was being provided to them. That would be a group quarters. And anything that's under construction that will be habitable close to the elements with final roof, window, and doors by Census Day, April 1st, 2020. Okay, are there any questions on group quarters?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
Unmute myself.
So go ahead.
So what about high school dormitories for boarding students?
What I recommend is including those as group quarters. If the student is less than 18 years old, they wouldn't be counted as residing there, but counted as a group quarters as my recommendation, because the staff that live there, some den moms and dads, that type of thing, who do live there, would be counted, and they could be taking use of those services. So I wouldn't worry too much about the cutoff of how old the students are. For the purposes of LUCA, do include that address in your LUCA update, just so that we can capture those populations. Some things that we don't want to include as a housing unit or group quarters is something that is condemned or demolished. If someone is living in a condemned building, then we would want to count them, because they are living, where someone would live or is living or could live. That does count. But if it is basically empty and condemned, that's an address that we can flag as deleted. Any RV parks where people clear out at the end of the week and they're not there, living there permanently, we don't want to be sending a census questionnaire there. And essentially anything that will be under construction but not habitable by April 1st, 2020. It's not close to the elements with final roof, window, and doors. We do not want to count that as a housing unit or group quarters.
One other group quarters question was, in group quarters, would students be counted on a certain date?
The way the census phrases the question is where you usually reside. If the student gets the questionnaire and they think to themselves, I usually reside in this dormitory, then they would fill it out. If the student gets the questionnaire, since it is self-reporting and it's phrased as where I usually reside, and they think, well, I'm only a part-time student, I usually reside at home, they would make the self-determination that this is not where they usually reside.
And then there's a request to back up one screen, I think, to the group quarters screen that defines, somebody's going to take a screenshot.
Okay, great.
And I think that's actually a really good question about the date, because I think, because I'm not a student, I'm used to thinking of that April 1st as, the date, sort of like with the homeless count, like it's on that date. But the reality is, if a student is on spring break on April 1st, that doesn't mean that they don't usually reside at their college. So it really is more where they usually reside as opposed to where they are exactly on April 1st.
Yeah. So a lot will pertain to the April 1st date, but it will be self-determined as to when they actually have the questionnaire in hand, where they usually reside. So if they get theirs mailed to them in March, and they think that, it is a self-response.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really good questions. Okay, so we have two different kinds of addresses for the purposes of LUCA that we have defined. One is a city-style address, and all that means is that it has a house number and a street name, such as 212 Elm Street. And sometimes these house number and street names, especially here in New York City, can be a little bit, there are variation on it. So 35A 4th Ave West, that's also a city-style address. I touched on this earlier, that the E911 data are great in Vermont, and that's a huge project that has been undertaken and completed successfully. The E911 data lists each residential address once, even if it's a multi-unit building. And in LUCA for census, we would like and need that address to be listed multiple times if it's a multi-unit home. So for example, the E911 data could say 212 Elm Street, but there are 3 apartments in there. We'd want it to say 212 Elm Street, apartment 1, again, 212 Elm Street, apartment 2, and 212 Elm Street, apartment 3. And that can be true whether it's a legal, quote unquote legal, zoned correctly multifamily, or if it's just a multifamily where many people live, many families live, and it's not zoned for that or correctly assessed that way. That the assessment and the zoning is not what we're getting after for census. We want to send 3 questionnaires to that house if 3 families live there. So we count everyone where they reside. We also have non-city style addresses. So a non-city style address is something that doesn't have a house number or street name, or maybe incomplete, where it could, have no house number and just the name rural route. My grandparents used to live on a rural route, Turkey Run Ridge. So they've since gotten a city style address, but it used to be a non-city style address. And sometimes those kinds of addresses include a location description, or a rural route and box number, or a highway number, contract route, or mile marker and box number. And those are okay to include in LUCA. Those all work. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do right now with the data that are available to start preparing for LUCA. Those materials will go out for the LUCA review in between February and April of next year. But right now, Census has counts for every residential address in the United States organized by block. And you can take a look at those right now to see if we have them wrong or right, or if you think that there are areas of change in your local community that we may have missed. That data are all available online right now. And furthermore, the census really does recommend prioritizing certain areas. If you choose to participate in LUCA, you do not need to review every single address in your local, in your town. If you choose just to review one street, that can make a difference. If you choose just to review one block, because that's all the time and resources that you have, that can make a difference. So if you don't have time to review your entire town, Census won't come after you and ask you why not. Just managing the time and resources that you do have available can make a real big difference in getting our census address list up to date and accurate. So here, what we're taking a look at are the counts available on the census website currently. And I took a look at Manchester, Vermont. So in the first column, we see here that the state is 50. Vermont is state number 50. It's a real easy, great number to remember. For some reason, there are 56 different state codes, and we only have 50 states. I don't know how that happened. But the first column is Vermont. The second column for Manchester is the county code 3. Manchester is all in the same tract, 9704. The entire town falls within one census tract. And then there are a number of census blocks within the town. So the first block here is 4037. And according to Census, there are 13 residential housing units and 0 group quarters in that block.
Hey,
so
Cynthia,
here, yep.
I apologize. I'm going to ask you to go back a couple steps. I missed a couple of the last couple of questions about the housing units and group quarters. So
Yep.
One question was, what about less formal living situations where there's an accessory unit within the building, where someone lives separately, but they don't actually have a separate mailing address?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. That is just the type of thing we're trying to capture in LUCA. So, for example, like an in-law apartment over the garage. That may not have its own address, but we do want to put that into the local update of census addresses, and we do want to send a questionnaire to that housing unit. It's a very, very broad definition for what we're counting. Anywhere someone lives or could live. So if that in-law apartment is zoned incorrectly, that is, that's one of the reasons why the census address list is Title 13 confidential. We do want to send a questionnaire to that address. We do want to count anyone living in that location, and we don't want them to feel as if the law will come after them because they are in a housing unit that isn't recognized legally.
Which comes right to the next question.
Okay.
And Irene comments that the town may not be able to help with identifying illegal apartments. We mentioned this briefly at the workshop as well, that it's, so she says if a town is participating in the process, how are the illegal apartment units identified? So, so the question here is if we're asking the towns to participate in this process, partly because they do have the local knowledge about where people might be living, even if they shouldn't be living there, but at the same time, the town is actually the organization that that does police that to some extent because they have zoning or whatever. That could be awkward for them. And I'll just comment that as I was reading this question, I was thinking, maybe there's a reason for a town actually to have someone who's not either not a town employee or not the zoning person do this address review and actually be the one person that is covered by the confidentiality form and therefore doesn't have to share that information with other people in the town office. But I'll also ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, it's I understand that's a challenge, and especially at the town level where there are like 2 or 3 staff and some of them are part-time, that there may be crossover here. And what I would ask is that if you are performing your LUCA review, you put on your LUCA review hat and think about these confidentiality and security guidelines. And then when you put on your assessor's hat or zoning hat, you take off the LUCA review hat and just keep these two things separate, and try to respect that confidentiality. I understand that there are difficulties with that. And if there is someone in the town that does not work on that wouldn't have that compromised view, hiring them part-time, I don't know if that's an option. That's something to think about.
Yeah. And then one more excellent question that I don't think we talked about yet, which is what about people who only use a P.O. box, or maybe who have both a P.O. box and a street address? But I think in particular the ones who only have a P.O. box and don't have a street address for mailing, don't have a mailbox at a street address. And his question is, which address should be used for LUCA?
Yeah, really good question. We do not want P.O. boxes. No P.O. boxes. The thinking behind that and the reasoning behind that is that P.O. boxes change hands. So the questionnaire could go out multiple times or twice to the same person. Also, we need to count people where they reside. These data are going to be used for apportionment and for allocating representation. So a P.O. box won't do that if they're in the wrong town. And we don't want to count someone in the town in which they get their mail. We want to count them in the town in which they reside. So if their address, we want the address for where they reside, the location. If no mail will be received at that address, we'll send someone out into the field to hand deliver that questionnaire. We'll make sure that they get a questionnaire. But for the purposes of LUCA in the local update of census addresses, we want the physical location. And that could even be one of these non-city style addresses, which is just gray house on the corner of Turkey Run Ridge. Maybe no mail gets delivered, we want the non-city style address in that case, not the mailing, or not the zip code for the mail, not the PO box. Good question.
So a couple more questions that have come in. One is actually a follow-up to the idea of the town having that conflict with illegal residences. But Irene asks, are nonprofits permitted to be delegated the LUCA responsibilities by the town? So if the town fills out the form and registers, but if one of the reviewers is an employee of a nonprofit that they're choosing to delegate that responsibility to?
Yeah, that's a good question. It might become more clear. I have a couple of slides that actually show the registration forms. So the short answer to that is yes, they can. And I'll talk more about that on upcoming slides.
Okay. They're coming in kind of fast now, but Carol asks, what about E911 confidentiality? I'm not sure if she means within the town, because town official, the E911 coordinator has access to the 911 address list for the town with names, and that, I believe, with names, and that is a confidential list. They're not supposed to give that out or use that for anything else. So I assume that's what she's asking about, and I'm not sure that you can answer that question. That might be a question for us or for a future webinar.
I can touch on it briefly.
Okay, great.
I just want to clarify that when the questionnaires go out, they're not going to have anybody's name on them. So we're not sending questionnaires out to people per se. We're sending questionnaires out to addresses. So in LUCA, if you're updating addresses, there will be no names associated with them.
That's a really good point. And I'll just comment, just in case she was asking about the mention of the state working with 911, that all would obviously be, it's the same issue, I suppose. There wouldn't be names associated with it. So we would only be working with the 911 addresses, which are not confidential, actually. And then Catherine asks the question that also came up in the other webinar, the other workshop, which is a common issue in Vermont. How do you account for cases where mail is sent to one town, but the house is located in a different town? And, you know, depending on where the house is physically located, depending on whether the address is determined by the end of the driveway, which might be in a different town, or just simply the fact that one town is delivering mail to another town, all of that stuff.
Yep. Post office will organize their routes depending on what works for them for mail delivery, and that leads them to some confusion over zip codes and you know, a post office in another town delivering mail to their town. That happens. So we really just want the physical location of the address, and every address that you use in the local update of census addresses will need to have a map spot, so a little dot on the map of where it actually is geographically, and or a latitude and longitude coordinate if you're using some of the digital software that we have, because we will get a census questionnaire to the address, whether or not the post office delivers there or not, but we need to have the correct location of the address. The location is what takes precedent, and the address that's associated with the location is what we're looking for, geographic location. Okay.
Great.
Okay. So these are these early tools, the residential address counts that are available on the LUCA website right now. If you just Google Census 2020 LUCA, the first link that comes up is our LUCA website. So you don't even have to remember the URL. I recommend just Googling Census 2020 LUCA and going to that website, because almost everything that I'm saying here today is available in one easy reference on that website, along with these address block counts. And all the registration materials as well, facts and answers and questions, frequently asked questions document, so that Census 2020 LUCA, and that's where you get these address block counts. So again, we say that there are 13 residential addresses in the block for Manchester, 4037, and 0 group quarters. So on this slide here, if you can see my mouse, what I did is I just went to the Tiger web on the census and printed out a map pretty easily of Manchester, Vermont. And I decided to say I want to include street names and I want to include census blocks so that you can get an idea of where the heck is 4037, that census block. And it's this cul-de-sac right here. And remember, we said that on that block 4037, there are 13 residential addresses. So if you know on that cul-de-sac in Manchester, if you're in that town, that there are 15 residential addresses, immediately you know that we're missing something. That's something that you want to update in LUCA. And if those are the only 2 addresses that you have time to correct and update in LUCA, that's a big difference. That's important. And that's something that's available right now on our website, so that when your LUCA materials come, either in February, sometime between February and April of next year, you know exactly which addresses you want to change. So if you've noticed that something is askew in your local area, these are the different products that will be offered for LUCA participation. I've already mentioned the GUPS, the Geographic Update Partnership Software. This is, I'll be talking more about this. This is recommended for any entity that has fewer than 300,000 residential addresses. So that's not a problem in most towns in Vermont. It is built specifically for the LUCA operation and has a lot of great built-in validation tools. You could also choose a paper product preference, and you'll get a bunch of paper address lists and a bunch of paper maps to update your area. If you have fewer than 6,000 residential addresses, and a lot of towns fall into this category in Vermont, the paper format for participation may be the best way for you to participate. You'll just be able to, each paper address list will come with 6 addresses on it, and then you can associate for each address a map spot on a paper map just by putting a sticker on that map where a new house has gone in. And you can use the address list add page to add that address using the paper option. You can also get a digital format for your address list and maps. If you are a GIS user, use ArcGIS for all of your things in your town for geographic planning. You can participate in this format. I believe that VCGI will be participating using a digital. And if you select a digital format address list and map, you will also receive the GUPS free of charge. All of this is free of charge. Okay, so GUPS. It's tailored to meet the needs of those without extensive GIS experience. It's specifically designed and developed by the Census Bureau for 2020 LUCA. It reduces the complexity of LUCA with specific tools, including review and validation tools. And importantly, for those Title 13 considerations, it has built-in security encryption, so that you'll be able to protect the data. And it standardizes the submission process by zipping and encrypting all necessary files. And again, we don't recommend the GUPS for entities that have more than 300,000 residential addresses. So if you choose GUPS for your product, here is a screenshot of what the GUPS will look like. GUPS is, in fact, based on QGIS, which is an open source platform and free. GUPS is a plugin that's been designed for the QGIS open source software. So if you have experience with GIS, you're going to see some of your standard toolbar GIS tools that you'll be familiar with, like select, zoom in, zoom out, deselect, and save. But we also have these LUCA specific toolbars that were designed specifically for the LUCA process. This window here will be a map of your local area. You're not going to receive data for anything that is outside of your local area, and you'll be able to zoom this in. It has all of these census tracks census tracks and blocks, so you'll be able to see very clearly everything that is happening within your local area. These black dots are all of the residential addresses that Census has that for your area that we think are there. And they correspond to the census address list down here. So this is one address, residential address. It's 3 Red Bus Road. It should say something like that. And there's also a place for you to upload via CSV file, Excel file, your user address list. So for example, if you are not a GIS user, I think that this part of GUPS is something that you should really feel comfortable with. As I mentioned, GUPS is fully supported. We're going to have a detailed user guide. I'm going to be giving webinars on how to use the GUPS software. And also there will be a dedicated phone number if you run into problems along the way for assistance. So much like an Excel spreadsheet for those of us that are not active GIS people, you can just double click within the street name and click, this is actually Red Bus Road, make your edit, type it in. When you click out of the cell, it will appear in bold, indicating that you've made an edit. And then you can click Save Edits here, and it will go back to the regular text.
Hey, Cynthia?
Yes.
I had a question that, again, didn't get to quickly enough a minute ago, but how, you mentioned the time frame and the fact that folks who register will get their materials sometime between February and April. Joanna asks, because she's from Burlington, which is, our biggest city, or sorry, South Burlington, one of our biggest cities. She's asking about how can they find out exactly when they'll be getting the materials, only because as they plan for staffing to support this activity, they would need kind of a more precise idea of when it's going to happen so that they can hire someone to help with it. So is it possible to ask to get your materials at a specific time?
That's a good point. I haven't heard that from headquarters yet. Headquarters is in Suitland, Maryland, and they haven't told me that yet. I would ask South Burlington to send me an email afterwards to see if I can look into that for them, since they are a larger area, to see if I can get them more details and make sure that headquarters knows that this is a concern. But I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that right now. And the broader answer is that once, so materials will go out between February and April, as I mentioned. Once an entity, a town, receives their materials, they will have 120 calendar days in which to perform their review. So that's not business days, that's calendar days. And I strongly recommend that ahead of receiving your materials, before materials are received, a great deal is done ahead of time in preparation for LUCA, so that once you receive your materials, that clock starts and you have the 120 calendar days to perform your review and make your submission. So as much as possible that's done ahead of time is very important. That you know exactly which addresses you think you want, the area you most want to focus on, and you have a full and complete residential address list for that area ahead of time. But please do, South Burlington, shoot me an email. I'll make sure that you have my contact information and I'll follow up with you on that. Okay. So on the right-hand side, this has to do with this preparation ahead of time for the user address list. If you upload a user address list that has a number of fields that will go through in a lot more detail in the technical workshops that we're going to have via webinar in January and February of next year. We'll talk about how to format your user address list to be uploaded into GUPS with a GeoID and lat-long coordinate, so that on this right-hand side over here, every address that you have that matches a census address will zero out effectively. And you'll be able to sort to those census blocks in which the difference between the census address list is different from the user address list, to focus on those priority areas. So that's a really neat feature. Every black dot you see here I mentioned is a census address list. If you upload the user address list with fields that are mapped and geocoded, a blue triangle will appear for every user address list, and wherever a user residential address, and wherever you see those two match, you'll know that that address is taken care of, and it will zero out in the address count list. Okay. So again, if you want to use GUPS and you're not a GIS whiz, this is just a zoom in of that lower hand screen that looks and works very much like an Excel spreadsheet. Right now we're viewing 785 of 785 records. And to make that more manageable, you can select, here it is, you can just select a street name to work with. You can sort all of these columns just like you can in Excel. You can work with a single census block at a town or a single street at a time to make this more manageable to work with. You'll also have, if you highlight one row, you'll be able to edit all of that address information in a single window. That's really easy and handy to work with. You'll be able to mark any address out of jurisdiction. You'll be able to mark it non-residential, and you'll be able to mark it delete and automatically the action code, the correct action code for that task will be assigned in GUPS for you. That's one of those handy tools. I mentioned some validation tools as well. Every time you click Save Edit, a validation tool will run in the background to make sure that the address has all of the components that it needs. In the New England area, we have those leading zeros in our zip code. So the Save Edits button will ensure that we have 5 digits in our zip code and that the address that you're putting into LUCA is formatted correctly. Okay, so GUPS includes built-in validation tools when editing and adding records. I just want to show you one other thing. This yellow folder is a great button. It will automatically zip and encrypt all of your LUCA submissions and stage them to get ready to be submitted back to Census. That's very handy working with the Title 13 data. If you're going to be using ArcGIS, you're going to have to go to table of contents and make sure that you're selecting all the correct shape files, and this will be done automatically for you in GUPS. So the GUPS has the address review tool. It checks records for valid content, and it will also ensure that there are no duplicates. So if you've put in that same address twice and forgotten to add apartment 1, apartment 2, the address review tool will find that, and you'll easily be able to make that change and correct it before your submission. And that will populate in the census address error list. And we can go through all of this in greater detail at the beginning of next year should you choose to use GUPS as your product.
Cynthia, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One is, can data be provided in multiple formats, such as GUPS and digital files and maps, or can you only select one?
So if you choose digital, and I'll show you this on the form that's coming up later. If you choose a digital address list and digital maps, then you will also receive GUPS. So when that 100 calendar days starts and you receive your materials, you'll have the choice of using the GUPS or your ArcGIS. So yes, you can get both. You will be getting both.
And then there's a question about how sensitive or specific the requirements are for the format for the addresses. So, for instance, if they put in RD for road, whereas the census info shows ROAD for road, will that be a discrepancy?
That won't be a problem, and this will be detailed a lot more in the user guide when you receive it. But if it's written out as road or just as RD, that will not trigger an error. When we talk about the census address error list window, that will not trigger an error at all.
And then the final one is, can we get a paper format if GUPS does not work on our computer? And I assume what that question means is if they request GUPS, but then they find out it doesn't work, can they then ask for paper instead?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, if you select GUPS and the GUPS arrives, your 100 calendar days does begin. And we can then send you paper materials, but the 120 calendar days does not reset. It will keep going. So while you're waiting for your paper materials to arrive, or if there's a technical problem that happens with GUPS, while that technical problem is occurring, your 100 calendar days keeps on ticking. So yes, you can receive new materials, but the timeline for your submission, that 100 calendar days, won't reset. It continues. Okay, so security considerations. Again, the GUPS automatically encrypts with these Title 13 security considerations. You're going to receive a separate password to access the Title 13 data. And all of the data that you're exporting for submission will be automatically encrypted using GUPS. And since there is the data in GUPS are Title 13 protected, you'll also get this scary countdown clock if you've been idle for 10 minutes. It will count down for 5 minutes, and then if no one clicks OK, everything will save, and GUPS will close down to protect Title 13 data that's being left unattended. So everything saves right where you left off for the next time you open GUPS. So if it gets down to, like 1 minute left on the clock and you want to click OK, if there's only a few seconds remaining, just let it close. Just let everything save and encrypt, and then you can log back into where you were. There is going to be a GUPS demonstration video posted on the LUCA 2020 website that I talked about, so that you'll be able to watch a demonstration of GUPS and kind of see some of how it works. So we're not going to play that now because it's about 20 minutes long. But later on, if you want to, please go ahead and go to that website for sure. Check out what's on the LUCA 2020 website and take a look at the GUPS demonstration video when it's posted. Okay, so finally, I'm going to go through some review and update strategies. A lot of this we've already discussed. Most towns do not have a residential address list already compiled with the addresses that Census is looking for per se, but there are a lot of sources that are available, and they all have strengths and weaknesses associated with them. So the E91 address files are excellent. They're very, very excellent, especially since they have latitude and longitude coordinates associated with them. But they also include things like fire hydrants and mile markers, and we do not want to be sending questionnaires to fire hydrants or mile markers. So we got to sort these out. We also want to sort out commercial addresses where people are not living and not include those types of addresses. The tax assessment files, the grands list in Vermont is a great place to corroborate the E911 address list for defining the residential status for the E911 addresses. And then you could also use things like voter registration files, but since not everyone registers to vote, that would be an incomplete list. So they all have strengths and weaknesses. So to register, this registration form D2002 was sent out in July. Hopefully it went to the right person. If it didn't get to you, this registration form is on the LUCA 2020 website. And to register, you'll put here in the upper right-hand corner your entity ID. If you don't know your entity ID, just email me. I will get that to you. You can find it on the Census website. I might even just point you to where on the Census website you can find it. But it was pre-populated in the forms that were mailed out in July. So you can just click yes, our government is registering for LUCA, or no. If you select no, please indicate. You can select a number of reasons why you choose not to participate in LUCA. Then in section B, this is going to get to the part where someone asks a question of, who's going to be signing these forms, and I have different people that are going to be working on the LUCA at different levels. We are going to need a signature from the person that authorizes LUCA in section B. And this person may have nothing to do with actually performing the LUCA review. Once they sign and fill out this section, they can forget about LUCA. But they are the person who is authorized and has the authority to say, yes, my town is participating in LUCA. Then, separately, we have a LUCA liaison. And this is it can be the same person, it can be a different person. This is the person who we are going to, here at the census, mail all the materials to, be in contact with, direct all LUCA communications towards. And finally, not shown here, are the LUCA reviewers. The LUCA reviewers are going to have to sign that confidentiality agreement form. And these are people that may not be the LUCA liaison, the contact, but they're going to be working on the LUCA review, and they are signing that they will keep that data confidential. So you can have any number of LUCA reviewers working on your team sign on to that confidentiality agreement form. So that was a question that we had earlier, and hopefully that's a little bit more clear. You're also going to get a product preference form, another of the forms that's available on the LUCA website. So you can just click GUPS, and then you've designated your way of participating in LUCA. Or if you don't want to participate using the GUPS, as I mentioned earlier, you can select digital for ArcGIS. You'll get a digital address list and a digital map, and you will automatically also get the GUPS should you choose that combination. Or depending on what works for your entity, if you have fewer than 6,000 residential addresses, you can select a paper address list, and if you have fewer than 6,000 residential addresses, you'll get 6 addresses per page, and you could choose a digital map or a paper map. You can do any combination that works for you. If you do select a paper address list, think about how you want those addresses sorted. They can come organized, sorted by census tract and block, or if you prefer, it can come sorted by street name and house number. So depending on how your address list is currently organized, you can organize your paper address list from the census to match. And then again, there's 2 sections here. You're going to put the LUCA liaison information, and it can be the same person that is completing this form. So it could be the LUCA liaison's information and then that same person again, or 2 different people. So getting to the last few slides that we have for today. Essentially, right now, what you can be doing is assembling your local resources to get prepared for LUCA 2020 and identifying those areas of concern and figuring out which areas in your town you want to focus on most, identifying the priority areas. Familiarize yourself with the LUCA materials more. That will happen when we have the the webinars in January and February, those technical webinars, and you'll set yourself up for a successful LUCA 2020 operation. Okay, so as I mentioned already, December 15th, Star Wars comes out, and also that's the LUCA registration deadline. And please do attend a technical training next year. And then the LUCA process will start in February of 2018. So I'm going to leave, this is the last slide that I have. I'm going to leave this contact information up for a while so you can take it down. And please do contact us with any questions that you have. Now I'm definitely a resource and happy to answer all questions that you have. Again, my name is Cynthia. I'm a geographic specialist with the Census Bureau. If that's all the time that you have today, then you can sign off of the webinar now. I want to thank Leslie very much for organizing this and putting this webinar together. Thank you, Leslie and BCGI. And if you have any questions, we can take people off mute, I think, at this point, and end the recording here, and answer any questions that people have, or Leslie, if there are any questions that have come in since then, we can take those as well.
Okay, I think we're actually caught up on questions right now, but we should probably give people a couple of minutes to type in any lingering ones that have come up in the last 10, 20 minutes or so. Sometimes right when I'm about to shut everything down, that's when the last few questions come in because people have been typing. Maybe I will very briefly sort of reiterate what Cynthia mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, which is that VCGI, Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and the 911 Board are planning to partner to review the address lists for the entire state. As Cynthia said, there's still a lot of value in the towns choosing to participate and review their lists because they are likely to pick up on locations that we at the state level would not, because we're really just looking to make sure that any addresses that have been added to 911 are part of the census list. We're not going to be looking much more in depth than that, I don't think, although we'll have more information about how exactly we're going to go about that later. But I know that we are going to do that to do the basic comparison with the 911 and the address list. And so that's why, even though we will be doing that, you don't have to worry that your town won't be reviewed at all, but there's additional value in having your town participate. So we do have a question. Could an RPC be the LUCA official? And I think what he really means is a LUCA reviewer for a municipality if it was designated by the select board.
Yes. So RPCs sometimes have more resources, not always, but I have spoken with every regional planning agency in Vermont personally, and they know that LUCA is going on and have different levels of ability to support their member municipalities. Some of them have attended workshops and are on the webinar right now. So thank you so much. A huge resource, and really also taking on a leadership role in this operation. So I do recommend you contact your RPC. They can be listed as a LUCA liaison on your forms. They could be listed as a LUCA reviewer on your forms, but you would work out with your regional planning agency or commission what works best and to what level of support they would be able to provide.
Great. And then two other questions. Carol asks about who chooses the LUCA reviewers, and actually I can answer that one. You, the town, or whoever the entity is that's filling out that form is who chooses who the reviewers are for your entity. So if the town is trying to register to participate in this, the town the town officials are the ones who are identifying the LUCA reviewers. And again, those reviewers can be town officials or anyone else that is designated by the town to represent them in that process of reviewing the information. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I want to clarify something that maybe I didn't say clearly enough. There can be a number of people within your town working on LUCA that don't have access to the Title 13 census address list. They don't need to be listed as a LUCA reviewer. So there may be people that are putting together local lists for you. We don't need them to be listed as a reviewer or to sign that confidentiality agreement unless they're going to be taking a look at the Title 13 protected census address list. Anyone that's looking at the Title 13 protected census addresses will need to be listed as a reviewer and sign the confidentiality agreement form.
Great. And then someone else asked about reviewing the 15th of December deadline, and I think specifically he's saying the information and forms that they supposedly already got. I think that implication there being if nobody in the town knows about those forms or where they are, how would a town, get the forms again and fill them out and send them in?
Yeah. Please do contact me. The New York geography I log into that email address, and I can make sure that those forms are emailed to your town with the entity ID for your town so that you can very easily scan them in and email them back into this go.2020.luca@census. So that can all happen. We do, if we receive late registrations, we'll deal with those on an ad hoc basis as well. We'll try to get everything done by December 15th. That's important. It is doable, but if this is the first time you're seeing those forms, I understand it can be difficult. We'll work with you on that. But in terms of getting the forms right now, they're available on the website right now. And you can scan them in and email them immediately to go.2020.luca@census.gov, and you can be registered before December 15th, 2020. I understand there are discussions that need to happen at the local level to get these forms filled out. So please email me if you have any concerns about that. We do have late registrations every time, and that's something that happens.
Another question is, does the town need to know the names of all the official reviewers at the time of registration, meaning, as they send in that form before December 15th?
No, you do not. You just need to register with the information that you do know, and then later, so you will be listed by the registration deadline then as a LUCA participant, and any changes that need to be made to the people that have access to the Title 13 data and who will be listed as reviewers, we can do that throughout the process. So you can add those names later on.
Great. Okay, I think, actually, Joanna asked a question about, it's more of a VCGI question, but is VCGI going to have a LUCA work group or guidelines? Or she's just pointing out that if a town doesn't think of a particular source of potential information to improve or review their address list, that might be helpful if VCGI pulls together information like that and provides it. And my response to her was, we haven't talked about that yet here, but it's a good idea. So just to everybody out there, we may put together an information page or something, a brief set of guidelines, just sort of from the local Vermont standpoint for towns participating in LUCA, but we haven't got any plans specifically for that yet, but you can check back and ask us about it later.
These are really great questions.
I know, Vermonters are good with the questions. Yeah, I think that's all we have. I don't see any more coming in. So just as a reminder to everyone, we did record the webinar, and it will be posted at the VCGI YouTube channel within a couple days, by tomorrow afternoon. And you can find that by just going to the front page of our website, going over on the left all the way down, and you'll see the link to the YouTube page. Or if you just go to YouTube and search on VCGI or Vermont Geospatial, you will find it, and it will be posted there. Oh, actually, one final question from Cheryl is, what happens if we do not do LUCA? And I guess you can go ahead and answer that, but I will say that from VCGI's standpoint, VCGI and the 911 board will do some work to review the address list for your town, regardless of whether the town participates or registers or not. The only difference really is that we won't be applying the same level of local knowledge and local attention to your individual town that you would be able to as a town. So that's the only, it's not that your town will get completely ignored and not updated, it's that it will be done by us at a state level. We're a little bit more like doing everybody all at once rather than just focusing on your town.
Yep. And absolutely, LUCA is voluntary. So if you choose not to participate in LUCA, it is a voluntary operation. Later on down the line, if you notice that you think the census count for your town is wrong, after the numbers are published and you want to, challenge it, or you want to try to get that redone or something to that effect for your area, the first question that they're going to ask you is, did you participate in LUCA? To, ahead of time, make sure that address list is correct when the questionnaires went out. So, we do think that LUCA is important. We think that a full and complete address list is the best way to get an accurate and complete census, which is our goal. So the LUCA operation is extremely valuable. That local knowledge that you have, we very much value. But it is a voluntary operation.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all we got.
Yay.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. I appreciate you doing this webinar, and I appreciate everybody who is participating for sticking with us for so long. Once again, it was very informational and different questions each time we talk about this, so that's really helpful for us too here at VCGI.
Well, thanks so much for setting it up. And I know that a 2-hour webinar is quite long, so thanks for sticking with us. We're ending a little bit early, so that's a good thing, just in time for lunch.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.